What's up, everybody? Welcome to another Grayzone Friday Live with me, Max Blumenthal, and award-winning Canadian journalist Aaron Mate. How you doing, Aaron?
Good, Max. Good. How are you?
I'm all right. A little overwhelmed with the amount of material we have to talk about this week. Are you in New York?
No, I'm on the other coast. I'm in LA right now, and
Nice.
yeah, by the beach. It's nice. I'm trying to finish my book, so I chose to be someplace by the water. I thought that'd be less distracting than my normal routine. But anyway,
Well, I'm
coming
hoping
soon.
to. I'm hoping to destroy your productivity today with a long stream. It's really hard for me to get anything done after these because, they're mentally really intensive. And your book is, we're going to cover a lot of topics that will fit right into your book, from Russiagate to Ukraine. So I really hope, I hope to see it in stores soon. I hope to see it in the front of every DC bookstore that had every insane, now totally discredited Russiagate book, along with anonymously authored CIA books by supposed North Korean dissidents. I mean, the DC bookstores are ridiculous, including the supposedly, progressive woke ones that host anti-war events occasionally, like Busboys and Poets. I walked in there the other day and they had, all these, all these books designed to make sure that Black people remain liberals who support whatever Obama wants. And there was one book prominently displayed, The Case for Cancel Culture. And it was written by a former Microsoft executive.
So that's a parody. That can't be real. That's hilarious.
Yeah, so it's really, really important that we have books out there that counter the tidal wave of neoliberal propaganda. So yours is one. You're on.
Didn't Busboys cancel your appearance about Management of Savagery? Was that Busboys?
Well, they never really offered one, and they're in competition with this other bookstore called Politics and Prose, which is like the main liberal bookstore owned by two ultra rich liberals who they canceled me.
They canceled. Okay, right.
Yeah. Under pressure from the Syrian regime change lobby, and the window of their store was broken. They were, completely bought into the narrative that I was some kind of pro-genocide neo-Nazi. And then the pushback from our side came, and they realized they'd kind of been had. So they actually supported, they sold books at a location that I had to arrange in some tiny little townhouse after this whole episode, where there were going to be protests outside against my book. So they were freaked out. So they really stood for free speech by selling my book quietly at a location that I had, like a private location I had to set up. And then they said they donated the proceeds to some free speech organization. So,
and now the Syria regime change lobby is on to more important matters, such as lobbying Congress to further deny Syrian civilians of food and medicine. That's their top priority right now, is to get this new so-called Anti-Assad Normalization Act passed, which would take the most draconian sanctions in the world on Syria and make them even worse. That's basically the goal. And investigate foreign countries that dare defy them in any way. These, it's such a crazy story. We can do more.
Well, the groups that were protesting me were the Syrian American Council. I think the Syrian Emergency Task Force were involved, and they were seminal in providing the appearance of grassroots Syrian support for the Caesar sanctions that were going to kill many Syrians. And now you have these comments by the outgoing UN humanitarian coordinator for Syria on sanctions, which you highlighted, Aaron.
Yes, he says, and he's worked years in this job of coordinating UN relief missions in Syria. He says this: American and European sanctions, despite all claims to the contrary, punish the poor and vulnerable. So that is from someone who's had on the ground experience at the UN. And at the UN, you're not supposed to say stuff like this. And of course, he's only saying this now that he's on his way out. But now he can admit the truth that American and European sanctions punish the poor and vulnerable. And yet the lobbyists for this, for these sanctions, always deny this basic fact when everyone admits it. It's just because that's what the sanctions are intended to do. It's not even as if like the sanctions have this unintended effect of punishing the poor. No, they're designed to punish the poor and vulnerable. And that's the latest admission of that.
Exactly. And, this is someone from the development side, someone who's involved in humanitarian assistance, and they're wondering openly, why did we send $27 billion into Syria when the U.S. is coming in and just killing everyone with sanctions? Like, what's the point? It's like, there's, the U.S. is funding the left hand to provide aid, and then the U.S. is using the right hand to kill everyone anyway, especially after an earthquake. And it never stops. It's completely out of the news, including all the airstrikes on Syria.
Yeah, by Israel.
America's unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East. We should turn to America's unsinkable aircraft carrier in Eastern Europe next, which is Ukraine, which literally just means the borderlands.
Well, let's do it. So,
well, first of all, hi to everybody, especially those of you watching from abroad. And thanks to Eric Thomas, Eric T. Red, for being behind the scenes here, helping us out a little bit on the technical side. We're going to talk now about the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And we talked last week about it. We talked the week before about it. So we've talked 3 weeks in a row about the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And every week it's the same. Doesn't seem like anything's happening there. Let's get that. For some reason, the tweet itself is like very small. But basically, what I'm showing here is what Ukraine's counteroffensive has been going for about 2 weeks, supposedly. This is showtime. The U.S. has been pushing Ukraine to do this. They don't quite have the equipment that they say they need, or maybe they have too much of a kind of equipment that they should have never had. And the Institute for the Study of War, which is an arms industry funded think tank in Washington that has been providing all the updates for the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Daily, produced this update, which contained a very interesting tidbit that for some reason the legacy publications in the US didn't want to touch. And it's that Ukrainian forces may be temporarily pausing counteroffensive operations to reevaluate their tactics for future operations. It's kind of like 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Now it's like 2 weeks to get through the outer ring of Russian defenses and try to push towards the land bridge, the Crimean land bridge. It's kind of reminds me of March 2020 for some reason. And, if the Institute for Study of War is acknowledging this, it's not very good for you. This group, by the way, is run by Kimberly Kagan. She is the sister of Robert Kagan, who is the husband of Victoria Nuland, who is the former chief of staff to Dick Cheney. So you get the point. It's not looking good for the Ukrainians. And then we even have CNN, Jim Sciutto, who, by the way, was the former chief of staff to Gary Locke, who is the ambassador to China. So basically, Jim Sciutto interrupted his journalistic career for 2 years under Obama to work in the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. That's how connected he is to the State Department. And I guess you could probably deduce U.S. intelligence and the military. We have a totally different, early stages of the Ukrainian counteroffensive having far less success, and Russian forces are showing more competence than Western assessments expected, say all of the officials that Jim Sciutto serves as a stenographer for. But they're optimistic long term. I mean, it's important to highlight these sources because these are the cheerleaders who have pushed Ukraine to this point. Jim Sciutto, has been one of the biggest cheerleaders for this military, the whole military operation. And it's important here to look back to the so-called Kharkiv counteroffensive, where Ukraine took a swath of territory around Kharkiv in eastern Ukraine and injected this confidence, and I would say hubris, into the chattering classes in Washington, the Ann Applebaums who serve as the cheerleaders of this war, and I would say the Pentagon itself. But what actually happened there was Ukraine was taking advantage of its partnership with the U.S. geospatial intelligence to assess where the Russian weak spots were. And Russia had been guarding their position in Kharkiv with just a small attachment of tactical police officers, basically a SWAT team, who were not heavily outfitted. They were outnumbered, and they organized immediate retreat, did not lose that many soldiers. And then Russia began positioning its forces as they did after Kherson. They continued to position their forces and harden their defenses on the left bank of the Dnipro River. But in the U.S., there was this sense, and I mean, you got it in Washington, this sense that Ukraine could actually mount a much larger counteroffensive based on these previous successes. But what they're doing is totally different. They're not actually able to take advantage of Russian weaknesses because Russia is so heavily entrenched that there really aren't weaknesses, and they're running right into the teeth of Russian artillery, Russian minefields, and Russian anti-tank weapons, and they're also facing Russian air superiority.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing about the air imbalance. Like, even if you know nothing about military affairs, which applies to me, it's just obvious that if you don't have control of the skies and where Russia has an overwhelming advantage, like, what chance do you really have for a major counteroffensive if your opponent dominates the skies, which is the case with Russia? Like, that's the part that never made sense. And like, I don't understand when they were planning this, how they intended to get around that. Obviously, maybe they thought they could overwhelm Russia with artillery, but even that doesn't make sense because Russia has the advantage there, as far as I know, from what I can tell. So militarily, it's like, was the only sort of strategy here, which is to just throw as many bodies as possible into Russia and see if it worked? Like, it seems that way given the comments of like people like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell. Like, Mitch McConnell said recently, it's far cheaper for us in terms of American money and lives for us to fight and support, for us to support Ukraine. So is that just basically all this is? It's just, we're going to just sacrifice as many Ukrainians as possible and see what comes of it? Because otherwise, I don't see what else could have been the strategy here.
Well, Zelensky's saying we're being very careful about not wasting lives. There is a rumor spreading around about a general mobilization, and one of these organizations that never fact checks all the official lies fact checked that, and what they found was a major district in Kiev had put out a call for all men from age 18 to 59 to make sure that they're registered for service. And then they declared that this rumor spreading on pro-Russian channels was misleading. I mean, you're going into the Obolon district of Kiev, which is one of the most heavily populated areas in the country, calling for everyone up to age 59 to make sure they're registered. That does suggest some level of desperation, and that, bodies are being lost unnecessarily, especially, men in the prime of their life. Then you have Forbes, not exactly the gray zone. Several powerful Ukrainian brigades are missing in action. This is referring to the 117th Brigade. Here's the 117th Mechanized Brigade with an AS-90 howitzer. I'm not an expert. I think that's definitely from a NATO state. I think it's from the UK. I'm sure people will correct me in the chat. But they're getting a lot. I mean, this brigade in particular is getting a ton of training from NATO states. They're getting a ton of advanced weaponry from NATO states, and they're missing in action. Where is the Ukrainian Army's 117th Brigade? The answer has implications for Ukraine's 18-day-old southern counteroffensive. So far, we've just seen 3, maybe 4 of the brigades in action alongside older Ukrainian formations. The 117th Brigade is one of the missing brigades. Where it is, what it's waiting for, could speak volumes about Kiev's strategy as the counteroffensive grinds into its 3rd week. Elements of the new 37th Marine Brigade outran its artillery support and lost several AMX 10RC reconnaissance vehicles. That really just speaks to the lack of eyes in the sky. They don't actually even know where they're going. A battle group from a pair of new brigades, the 33rd Mechanized and 47th Assault Brigades, got mired in a minefield and abandoned a couple dozen of its best tanks, fighting vehicles, and breaching vehicles. And of course, we heard from Russia's MOD that close to a dozen Leopard tanks have been destroyed. They're claiming something like 15,000 Ukrainian casualties so far. Staggering number. I don't know if it's true, but we can clearly see from, you just do a Google News search, look up counteroffensive, and you will not find any good news. Even Vladimir Zelensky himself is acknowledging that the counteroffensive, may be going slower than desired.
Jeez.
And then he declares that the war is not a Hollywood movie after courting Sean Penn and Orlando Bloom and all these washed up actors at his office, as Putin announces that, nuclear ICBMs, right? That's The Guardian for you. But, The Guardian, another huge cheerleader of this operation.
Yeah.
Not exactly spreading the good news.
What you say there about Zelensky courting celebrities, that does appear to me to be his government's main strategy right now. Forget military strategy. It looks like, I think they actually believe, because the cult of celebrity around Zelensky is so strong, that other celebrities will be their salvation. So look at this headline from the Wall Street Journal. It says this: Zelensky's number 2 turns to celebrities as well as politicians to help Ukraine. You're in the midst of a war that you say is for your survival, and Zelensky's top guy, Andrei Yermak, is talking about courting celebrities, and that's what this article basically says. They go on to say that one part of Yermak's plan, Andrei Yermak, Zelensky's chief of staff, is get celebrities from Latin America to visit Kyiv, as a raft of Western stars have done since the start of the invasion last year. And Yermak says, "I'm against formal diplomacy. It's dead. It's a new time. Soft power. It's necessary. I need results." So he's following the State Department line of soft power, which, for the State Department, that also includes coercion and sanctions. But it also here, in the case of it means propaganda operations, including attracting celebrities. That's what you're thinking of right now when you're facing this awful war and you're sending off tens of thousands of more people to die. You're talking about celebrities as if they're going to save you. That really, I think, is the level of thinking inside the Zelensky government. And look at this line. This line is so telling to me. Yermak says efforts before the war to make a deal with Russia were hamstrung by a 2015 agreement concluded under Western pressure that handed Moscow control over parts of Ukraine. So they're talking about the Minsk Accords. And it's a false statement that Minsk handed Moscow control over parts of Ukraine. Minsk handed Ukraine control over the Donbass, its own territory. All it had to do was recognize limited autonomy there, especially the cultural rights of ethnic Russians who didn't want their language being banned by the coup regime that Yermak is a part of. That's it. That's what they mean by handing Moscow control. That means basically recognizing the rights. In real life, that means recognizing the rights of ethnic Russians inside of Ukraine. And what's amazing is, so this guy's saying that efforts to make a deal with Russia were hamstrung by a deal that they already reached, which was the Minsk Accords. So that's basically Yermak saying that we couldn't make peace with Russia because we refused to live up to our own peace deal. That's what he's basically saying there. Imagine saying that we can't make a deal with Russia because they're insisting on us returning to a deal that we already made. That's what he's basically saying there. So it's such a revealing window into their thinking. And it gets to the point then later in the article where this guy Yermak is talking about, like, he's scrolling on social media to find other targets. One of them is Colombian singer Maluma, who has 63 million followers on Instagram, a huge potential audience for Ukraine's message. I don't know this singer, Yermak said. It's not my music, but we need him. Okay, so that's what one of Ukraine's top officials is thinking of right now, is getting Instagram influencers to come and help them and save them. It's unbelievable.
Well, it's also a lot like the Western equipment. It's like their whole mission is to just court as much of the West as they can, from the soft power of Hollywood to the supposedly superior hard power of Raytheon and Lockheed Martin's technology. And right now it's not making a difference. I mean, do their F-16s have AWACS in the air supporting them, providing them with intelligence on the ground of what targets to hit? Or are they just flying blind? Or is that going to happen? If they have AWACS, that means U.S. airmen will be flying in support of Ukrainian missions. If they don't have AWACS, how effective can that actually be? Do they even have the right airfields? I mean, with an F-16, it's difficult to land on some short, dirty airfield. You have to sweep it clean, as I've been told by military experts. I mean, do they really need Leopard tanks? Is that really going to change the state of battle? Why is Anne Applebaum, someone who could not even fire a Beretta on Fareed Zakaria? I doubt she's even fired a BB gun in her life. Why is she suddenly a military expert clamoring for the West to deliver all these weapons? How does she know they're going to change the state of play? And what is Ukraine doing economically? It's bringing in the whole neoliberal fourth industrial revolution without any question about what it might do to its society. It's opened itself up as a laboratory for some of the most predatory elements, from BlackRock to the credit industry, as we discussed several weeks ago with the Ukrainian Dia app, which, by the way, Anne Applebaum praised in her piece, gushing about the coming counteroffensive and how it can retake Crimea. Will there be any consequence for the pundits in Washington who've been talking up the counteroffensive, like Anne Applebaum? Will they be called on the mat? This is blood on their hands.
It's unfathomable how many people there respond. Just like in Syria, remember when Brett McGurk, the former U.S. envoy to the anti-ISIS coalition, he said that pundits in Washington who encouraged the dirty war, he said the people like Charles Lister, he said they have blood on their hands. They got people killed, and that applies to Ukraine as well. It's the same crowd, obviously, because that's all they do is just warmonger on behalf of neocon policies. But in the case of the state of the equipment that Ukraine's getting from the West, people like Scott Ritter say that this is not new equipment. This is like stuff that they've like refurbished. They've taken out of like storage and just sent in, because it's equipment that, according to what, like, at least what Scott says, this is some equipment that these countries don't even want. They don't use anymore. So they give it to Ukraine as kind of like, it's like secondhand. It's like hand-me-downs. It's not even top of the line equipment. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what someone like Scott Ritter says.
Yeah, and what they want next is ATACMS, which is designed specifically to strike inside the Russian Federation. That can't go well. We had a question about addressing the counteroffensive from Lloyd Austin's 5 angles. I don't know what that refers to, but Lloyd Austin on the 15th, a week ago, said that the counteroffensive is going to be painful and there will be losses. Mark Milley said the same thing, and well, he turned out to be a prophet, but he claims to be confident. And what I've seen from Lloyd Austin, he's just saying whatever the Biden administration wants him to say. He's kind of a political appointee. Milley's kind of the same.
That was confirmed by the Pentagon leaks, where we learned from that the Pentagon privately assessed that at the very best, Ukraine's territorial gains would only be modest. And that's in the best case scenario. They also predicted that, they also warned that it would not go well. That's what they were saying privately. In public, Austin was going before Congress and saying Ukraine has a strong chance of success. He knew that was a lie. So exactly, he was just saying what Biden wanted to hear. Milley called for negotiations last year, and then because nobody backed him up, and especially in the State Department, like Blinken and Sullivan, obviously Newland, were against any kind of diplomacy, he just backed down. He just kind of forgot that he said that Ukraine was in the best position back last year, like in the late fall, to negotiate then, and that it wouldn't be retaking any more territory, so it had to consolidate its gains then and negotiate then. He just forgot about that because he's also ultimately a political actor.
Absolutely. We'll see what happens after this supposed operational pause. We'll see if the 117th Mechanized Brigade materializes. There's a lot of chatter right now about Yevgeny Prigozhin, the boss of the Wagner group, making some extremely controversial comments about Russian Defense Chief Sergei Shoigu, blaming him for the invasion of Ukraine, claiming there was actually no threat to the Donetsk region, the Donetsk Republic from the Ukrainians. Pro-Ukrainian channels are going bonkers with this. So is mainstream media. And there is some rumor of a Russian attack on a Wagner base. I'm hearing all kinds of chatter. We're going to have to address this next time, but because I can't quite process it right now and make sense of what's what.
Is it possible that Prigozhin is engaged? Pure speculation. Is it possible he's engaged in some kind of psyop to make it look as if there's disarray inside the ranks of the Russian military leadership? Because otherwise, I mean, especially what he was saying during Bakhmut, it just doesn't make sense to me how he could stay in that position and he's so harsh when it comes to the Russian military leadership. Or is this a genuine split? In which case,
yeah,
that's real. I mean, that's really significant if he's actually being straight up. But it's hard.
I feel like one of these fake Kremlinologists, like Michael Weiss, wondering, right, is this Maskarovka? But
you have to wonder, though. It's like, it's so strange. Like the stuff he's saying, it's if he's being sincere. I mean, he also just he said something about how he basically called out Russia's pretext for invading. He said that basically Russia didn't have to go in, which is crazy because he was a diehard supporter of the invasion initially. So I just don't get what he's up to.
Yeah, and a lot of people want me to say Wagner instead of Wagner, but I just feel weird saying it. I refer to the composer that way. I really enjoy Tannhauser, a people's chorus, when I'm in a dark mood. And you know, now I'll get accused of anti-Semitism for saying I like Wagner. But in any case, yes, it is possible. It was a psyop. It's possible, given the record of Prigozhin declaring that his forces are pulling out of Bakhmut, that they've lost their supply lines. This was followed apparently by Ukrainian reinforcement, and then they were just blasted to hell and they retreated entirely from the city. And that was when the Wagner group claimed full control of Bakhmut. So yes, there is a possibility there. I just don't want to be one of these Kremlinologist pundits. I want to be sure of what I'm saying.
Fair enough. Well, meanwhile, let's highlight one dangerous development so this counteroffensive from Ukraine is going terribly. Everyone admits that. So what does Zelensky do? He comes out and he says this: we just had a report from our intelligence and the security service of Ukraine, same agency, by the way, that called for me to be banned from Twitter and asked them to hand over my info. So, take that for what it is. Intelligence has received information that Russia is considering a scenario of a terrorist attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, a terrorist attack with radiation leakage. They have prepared everything for this. So this warning from Zelensky comes right as they're getting their asses kicked in this counteroffensive. And I don't know if this is, at best, I think this could just be an effort to distract people from how awfully the counteroffensive is going for them. At worst, and this is just a possibility, this is an act of projection, and that possibly Ukraine is maybe crazy enough to do something like this and then blame it on Russia. I really hope that's not the case, but I'm hoping that this is just propaganda. They're trying to distract from how badly the offensive is going, and they're not actually putting this out there in preparation for something that they might do. because the
Okay,
idea
that relates to. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it just also, again, this comes back to it's Russia that controls that nuclear plant, and there's been this farce going on for, I don't know, almost a year now, maybe more, where Russia controls the plant, and the media reports that the plant is being shelled, but the media always, like the U.S. media always says it's unclear who's shelling the plant, but it's likely Russia. So basically, according to the narrative, we're supposed to believe Russia is shelling a nuclear plant that its own forces are controlling. And this is, the latest part of that farce that we're supposed to just accept.
Yeah. And it's kind of it would be nice if the IAEA would clear that up. They're starting to remind me of the OPCW. Here's Lindsey Graham. We got to fight this war down to the last Ukrainian. And Richard Denang Dick Blumenthal. He's not a member of my family, unfortunately, because I could at least say something about this at some reunion or something. I don't know. We don't actually have family reunions, but they have a Senate resolution saying any event in Ukraine which allegedly results in a dispersal of radioactive contaminants should be cause for invoking Article 5 of the NATO treaty and going to war against Russia and Belarus, which has now received tactical Russian nuclear weapons. So that would be a nuclear exchange if Belarus was threatened in an existential way. Here's that resolution. These are psychopaths who hold powerful positions as Republican and Democrat in the Senate. They're calling for, essentially, they're inviting a false flag operation around the Zaporozhye nuclear plant, which was already threatened by the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, which feeds its coolant with its coolant capacity with water. This is an invitation for a false flag and a World War III.
And why is Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, why are they so hostile also to this move of Russia to put nukes in Belarus? Because they know that Russia is not going to use those nukes, unless, of course, Russia is attacked with nukes first. They know that Putin actually is setting the stage for negotiations. So when you talk to the U.S. and NATO, Russia gets something out of withdrawing its nukes from Belarus. That will be one of Russia's concessions. Russia is setting the stage for that. And what Russia wants, and this was laid out in their draft treaties that they put to the U.S. and NATO in December 2021, a few months before the invasion, Russia wants the rollback of NATO weaponry that threatens Russia, especially these U.S. missile sites in Poland and Romania.
The Aegis systems, the dual-use Aegis systems.
Exactly, which the U.S. insists are to defend Europe from Iran, which everyone knows is the biggest joke in the world. So that's what Putin's doing here, putting these nukes in Belarus. This will allow, whenever negotiations happen, this will allow the West to say we got this concession from Russia and that we got the nukes out of Belarus. That's what that's for.
It's like the Jupiter missiles in Turkey, which precipitated the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Khrushchev then retaliated by putting nuclear missiles in Cuba, which led to the withdrawal of the Jupiter missiles from Turkey. Russia has, and then the Soviet Union, they have a strategic depth and they have the ability to use deterrence to enforce their sphere of influence. And what these psychopaths like Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal believe is that Russia is not entitled to any sphere of influence at all, and it must completely be pushed back until Russian forces are reinforcing the suburbs of Moscow, as they did during World War II, also when they were fighting against German tanks. Let's listen to Dr. Strangelove, Lindsey Graham.
Senator Blumenthal and I want to put everybody in this body and this Congress on notice that the threat of a use of a nuclear device by Russia is real. And the best way to deter it is...
This is the red line all over again.
...to give them clarity, the Russians, as to what happens if they do that. They will be in a war with NATO.
Poland is at immediate risk if the use of tactical nuclear weapons or destruction of a nuclear power plant causes radiation to spread, as almost certainly it would, causing significant human harm. This is not a kind of reckless or panicky resolution. It's
Yes,
based
it is.
on fact and science, and it is meant
Science?
to send a message.
It's based on science. I love that. Where did he get that language from?
To Vladimir Putin, and even more directly to his military.
Right.
They will be destroyed. They will be eviscerated if they use tactical nuclear weapons, or if they destroy a nuclear plant in a way that threatens
There we go.
NATO nation.
There we go. So that certainly bolsters the argument here that there's a planning for a false flag, if that's the warning being put out there. I mean, I really hope it's not the case. It's so, by the way, it's so fitting that the replacement for John McCain as Lindsey Graham's like neocon buddy sidekick is a Democrat, because John McCain's ideology is totally taken over the Democratic Party. So it's so fitting that Richard Blumenthal is playing John McCain's role, and even more fitting that Blumenthal, you know, like McCain served in Vietnam, was captured there, really played that up. Blumenthal, his relation to Vietnam is he lied about his service in Vietnam, right? That's kind of his claim to fame. He played up his role, I think, in Vietnam. Isn't that kind of what he's known for?
Yeah, he claimed he had got a Purple Heart that he never got.
Right, there we go. Yeah,
he was wounded.
So what a fitting replacement for John McCain as Lindsey Graham's neocon buddy.
Well, yeah, John McCain's military legend was trumped up too, but he did suffer enormously in the Hanoi Hilton. This is the perfect portrait of the Beltway Uniparty. You got a Republican and a Democrat. They disagree strongly about abortion, and they support strongly. They stand united in favor of a post-birth abortion for humanity through nuclear weapons. And they're both raking in the military contractor bucks. Ukrainians are suffering, and Ukrainian men are suffering and dying in this counteroffensive. The Beltway bandits that fund the campaigns of Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal are not suffering. They're doing very well. We've got a piece coming out pretty soon which will show how well they're doing. We have done an unofficial audit of a lot of the expenses that we, the U.S. taxpayer, are covering in Ukraine. And it's going right back here to some of the most corrupt, criminal-minded contractors you can imagine. This is sick. I mean, that's why we have to keep talking about it. It's sick. And it's like Vietnam in a way, just the folly of it, the lies, the best and brightest designing this catastrophe. The difference is you don't have working class American boys going over and coming back in body bags, or with their legs blown off, or they're, or driven insane, hooked on heroin. This is the future of warfare for the U.S., and Taiwan is next.
Yeah. And, speaking of what we're getting for our money here, the U.S. just found some more money. It's a miracle. The Pentagon announcing that because of an accounting error, they freed up another $6.2 billion for the Ukraine proxy war.
Some announcements earlier this year. During the department's regular oversight of our execution of Presidential Drawdown Authority for Ukraine, we discovered inconsistencies in equipment valuation for Ukraine. In a significant number of cases, services used replacement costs rather than net book value, thereby overestimating the value of the equipment drawn down from U.S. stocks and provided to Ukraine. Once we discovered this misvaluation, the comptroller reissued guidance on March 31st, clarifying how to value equipment in line with the financial management regulation and DoD policy to ensure we use the most accurate of accounting methods.
Yes.
We confirmed that for FY23, the final calculation is $3.6 billion. And for FY22, it is $2.6 billion, for a combined total of $6.2 billion.
Bam. There we go, everybody. We just found
it's like when you thought you like had some like money wad in a sock and you lost it when you were a kid. You'd like, it was your allowance, or you'd been doing yard work, and then you find it like under your bed a year later and you're just so happy.
Yeah.
And it's so nice of them to give back, you know, and of the Biden administration to give back to the American people during such economic hard times by allowing the Pentagon to just freely spend that money on more equipment for Ukraine.
And
I
meanwhile,
think we could, yeah, go ahead.
well,
I think we got to
before
move on.
Just one more thing, because this happened this week. I mean, there's so much Ukraine news, and there's so much we're not going to get to, unfortunately, but we have to get to this.
Somebody's got to do it.
Putin this week presented this document, which is, he says, was a copy of the peace agreement that Ukraine signed last spring, last April. And this is the latest piece of evidence that there was a deal reached between Ukraine and Russia in the early weeks of the war that could have ended it. The basic bargain was Ukraine would commit to neutrality. It would commit to limits on its armed forces and its weaponry that could be used to threaten Russia and the Donbass. And in exchange, Russia would withdraw to its pre-invasion lines. And the issue of Crimea would basically be left unresolved. It would be frozen. So Russia would keep Crimea. So Putin says that this is the document that, and he says that Ukraine signed it. He showed a signature. I haven't seen anybody argue that this document is a fake. And it comes after a whole series of other sources, all of them NATO sources close to Zelensky, the former Israeli prime minister, the Turkish foreign minister, and Fiona Hill, speaking to U.S. officials. All of them have said the same thing, that there was a deal reached between the two sides. And, you know, a few of those sources, the Zelensky sources and Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli prime minister, and the Turkish foreign minister, all of them said the West blocked the deal. And so Putin now producing for the first time a copy of the agreement. I didn't see any reporting on this in the establishment media in the West. It just goes over everyone's heads. It's deemed unimportant. And it just underscores that all of this carnage could have been avoided had the U.S. and NATO and its far-right allies in Ukraine just been willing to accept the rights of ethnic Russians inside Ukraine and accept some limitations on NATO, including, in this case, just keeping Ukraine neutral. So not expanding NATO into Ukraine. And that couldn't happen. They wanted to use Ukraine instead to bleed Russia. And this is the result we're seeing now.
Well, actually, and this is kind of my fault, but we asked the State Department about that, the legitimacy of that document, through our Washington correspondent, Liam Cosgrove, who's just been doing the Lord's work in the Pentagon and State Department, or the atheist Lord's work, depending on what you believe. And he asked, what's his name? Patel. I forget the spokesman's name. But he asked him, it wasn't him. It was actually an African reporter who first started to emphasize that there was this negotiation put on the table by Putin, that Putin brought it up at the St. Petersburg Economic Conference. And she said, you know, it's very important. This war is hurting Africa very badly. What about this? What about this document? Is it true? Is it real? No, she wasn't saying, is it true? She just mentioned it. And then Liam followed up and said, do you know that if this document, do you agree that it's real? Like, do you agree that it exists? Are you saying it's a lie? And Patel just completely deflected. It wasn't clear if he was claiming that he didn't know it existed or that he didn't believe it was real or not. He just deflected completely and moved on.
Whenever I've written the State Department and the National Security Council about this, they've never denied that there was a deal reached. They've never denied it. They issue a generic response that we encourage diplomacy, blah, blah, blah. But they never deny it because it's true. There was. I mean, so many sources have confirmed it now. And the fact that the media, if Putin was lying, the Washington Post, New York Times will be all over it, reporting on this. Putin says there was a deal reached. He even has a document that's Russian disinformation. No, it's true. Yeah. So they have to ignore it.
Yeah. It's true. And what it means is that the West needed this war to go on as long as possible, the collective West, and especially the U.S., as Tony Blinken said, there are many economic opportunities after the detonation of Nord Stream. And as we can see, there's been a big boon in the arms industry and with the Beltway bandit contractors in Washington. And I think that it's really the Pentagon And Tony Blinken, who's involved in business with these same forces through West Exec Advisors, which Victoria Nuland was also involved with. She was also the founder and president of CNAS, Center for New American Security, which was funded by the arms industry. You can go on, but they have a vested interest in this war going on as long as possible. I want to move on to Modi's visit. I also want to talk about the debate about Peter Hotez, because I think it speaks to a wider issue that we've encountered, and you've encountered, Aaron, in debating experts. So can we do Modi's visit first?
Yeah.
All right. And then, I mean, hopefully we can get through it quickly, and there should be time for Durham, Hunter Biden, and a lot of other good stuff. So Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Washington now. He was at the United Nations in New York and also led the largest practice of yoga in New York City. And then he addressed Congress yesterday and delivered a joint press conference with President Joe Biden, who seemed to be sort of a diminished figure. It was not the same as if he had been standing beside Donald Trump. So it was really the Modi show. Narendra Modi has a 77% approval rating, which makes him possibly the most popular leader of any democracy or ostensible democracy in the world. India is now the 5th largest economy in the world. Its growth rates are off the chart. And he arrives in the US at an obviously very pivotal moment. I can tell you just from being here in Washington that the pageantry surrounding his visit was much more perceptible and palpable than when other leaders visit here, even possibly including Zelensky, partly owing to the fact that DC has a huge Indian diaspora population, Indian American population that lives in the Virginia suburbs here. The Indian diaspora is massive in the United States and is moving into a very influential position in our society, but also because of where the Biden administration is trying to take things vis-a-vis Ukraine and China and the importance of India to both of those campaigns. And so Modi needed to be courted, and India was treated with respect that I don't think it has received in the past. Modi also comes from a right-wing party, the BJP. He was banned for several years from entering the US for his alleged role in the Gujarat riots, in which local Muslim population was killed by Hindu extremists. And he wanted to present India as a democracy that values minorities. So in his speech, as Zelensky did to Congress, he referenced Martin Luther King. He also referenced his relationships with several late senators from both parties and emphasized India's democratic nature and the fact that it has over 2,000 political parties and scores of parties that hold office. It was, I mean, indisputably a victory for Indian soft power, whatever you think about Modi. And a much better presentation than Zelensky put on when he stepped off his special aerial limousine, delivering him from a U.S. base in Poland to Washington. He stepped off looking like a kid dressed up as G.I. Joe for Halloween, crossed with a vice correspondent and Che Guevara, and stepped into Congress without he was obviously a very uncomfortable figure. And then he just issued like a laundry list of, it was like trick or treat. And he just said what advanced weapon systems he wanted, or he was going to, egg your house. He was going to egg the White House. That's what it felt like. Modi it was a much more graceful presentation. It went over much better, but there was resistance to it. And it came from the progressive elements in Congress, as well as the human rights industry led by former Human Rights Watch de facto leader Ken Roth, who served for like 30 years. But AOC was among the loudest voices, along with Ilhan Omar, in condemning Biden's meeting with Modi. AOC and progressives to boycott Indian PM Modi's address to Congress, say it's shameful to let him speak. So basically what they want is the U.S. to reject the most popular leader of the most populous nation on the planet with the fifth largest economy on the basis of human rights. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is among the Democrats boycotting in protest of India's human rights record. A joint address is among the most prestigious invitations and honors the U.S. Congress. We should not do so for individuals with deeply troubling human rights records, particularly for individuals whom our own State Department has concluded are engaged in systematic human rights abuses of religious minorities and caste-oppressed communities. And Cory Booker joined in. I think the Ilhan Omar boycott was pretty predictable. But Cory Bush, not Cory Booker. Cory Booker was actually probably there. Cory Bush joined in. Modi has a shameful history of committing human rights abuses, targeting journalists, undermining democracy. I stand in solidarity with communities that have been harmed by Modi. You know, that she's using this language of harm and solidarity. What effect did their boycott have? It had really no effect. It was, as usual, it's like everything else they do in Congress. It's virtue signaling. And Modi does have a human rights record that's troubling. So does Zelensky. So does Joseph Biden. I would say that their human rights record is far worse than Modi's. Far worse than Modi's. Vladimir Zelensky has banned all opposition media under presidential order. What is Modi accused of? He's always attacked for assaults on press freedom. Vladimir Zelensky has banned all opposition parties and had his chief rival arrested and roughed up by the Ukrainian SBU, Viktor Medvedchuk. What is Modi accused of? He's accused of his party overseeing some kind of lawfare campaign against Rahul Gandhi. Then there's Biden. Then there's the Biden Justice Department indicting the top opposition leader in the United States, who's the presidential frontrunner, on some ticky-tack charge after pursuing him on phony charges of collaborating with Vladimir Putin. You've got the FBI going after the leaders of the grassroots Trump opposition. You had the Patriot Act used to get a terrorism enhancement for an old man who participated in the January 6th riots. You have the Espionage Act being used against Trump. You have the Espionage Act being used against Julian Assange for publishing factual classified documents, as journalists often do. So the hypocrisy is just a little bit too extreme here. And what AOC and Cory Bush are effectively doing is playing the role objectively of the more hardline neoconservative elements who are furious with India and Modi, not for human rights abuses or anything like that. That's just actually like background noise. The US doesn't really care about human rights. We all know that. It's for being non-aligned and for maintaining neutrality on Ukraine. This is Reuters 2 days ago. India's Russian oil buying scales new highs in May. India's rising imports of Russian oil hit a new record high of close to 2 million barrels a day. That's massive. Denting purchases from Iraq and Saudi Arabia, tanker data shows. India is the third largest oil consumer in the world. It buys more than 80% of its oil from overseas, and its refiners have been gorging on Russian oil. And this infuriates the Biden administration It infuriates everyone who has tried to, in Biden's words, reduce the ruble to rubble. One of the biggest failures of the U.S. in this war has been its failure to scathe in any structural way the Russian economy. And Russia has realized that it doesn't necessarily need the U.S. if it can turn to the two other biggest consumers of oil in the world, China and India. And that brings us to China. India is a member of the Quad group that is essentially a U.S. coalition against China, but it's also the weakest link. And the U.S. wants to bring India in on an anti-China crusade. And in India, obviously, it has a longstanding border dispute with China. Many people in India actually blame the U.S. for the border war that broke out. If India can ease hostilities with China, it's going to extinguish the hopes of any U.S. military or sanctions campaign or decoupling from China. And that was the other objective here. So AOC, Cori Bush, they're objectively playing the role of those who want to weaken India as a non-aligned power. I look at Modi as a leader who represents, while he represents, the fourth industrial revolution, this tech sector. He talked a lot about, central, like digital currency and all of these, all of these agendas that are popular in Davos. That's something that he's always represented. He does represent the Hindutva movement in India. He also represents India's non-aligned tradition, the same tradition that played out at the Bandung conference, and that is coming to bear. And that is what is at the heart of this visit, and which has put the U.S. and India on a collision course as the U.S. seeks to drive the Biden administration, particularly driving towards a military campaign over the Taiwan Strait. There are military drills scheduled around Taiwan, and this is a direct threat to China's national security. So, I mean, I just see the progressive caucus here as kind of like useful idiots. They have no idea what they're doing. And ultimately, it's just virtue signaling. It's just background noise.
When it comes to Modi's record, I thought the main allegation against him is that he was blamed for the killing of thousands of Muslims in 2002 when there was violence against them in a state where I think he was the chief minister or the chief security minister. But I agree that this outrage against him, if he was fully subordinate to U.S. interest, there's no way you'd be seeing this level of protests against him inside the U.S. And a good example now is Saudi Arabia. All of a sudden, you have like Senator Richard Blumenthal. He's calling for that investigation of that Gulf association, which has been acquired by Saudi Arabia. He wants that investigated now, and it's obvious why. It's because Saudi Arabia is now pursuing an independent path. They've re-engaged with Iran. They made a deal with Iran. They're leading the way in bringing Syria back into the fold after taking part in the U.S.-led dirty war coalition. And now people like Richard Blumenthal are outraged and pretend to care about Saudi Arabia's human rights record. And so I agree when it comes to Modi, there's probably a similar thing going on, that if he was obedient, you wouldn't be hearing about his human rights record.
Completely. I mean, you can look at the U.S. rolled out the red carpet for Mohammed bin Salman back in, was it 2017?
Yeah.
Prior to Khashoggi, he was drinking vodka with The Rock. He was meeting with Oprah. He was rolling out Saudi Arabia's sovereign investment fund for all these Hollywood productions, taking control of U.S. companies. They loved him. And it's not about Khashoggi. It's about Saudi Arabia moving closer towards becoming a member of the BRICS. It's about Saudi Arabia welcoming Nicolas Maduro, displaying the Venezuelan flag. And then when Tony Blinken follows on his heels to do damage control, like Harvey Keitel's character in Pulp Fiction, they don't display the U.S. flag. There's no such pageantry. So the Merrick Garland Justice Department is waging lawfare all over the place. PGA Tour informed Department of Justice is officially investigating Saudi Arabia's Gulf deal.
Yeah.
I mean, when have they ever done this before? Come on. Don't piss on my head and tell me it's raining. This is about Saudi Arabia starting to trade oil with Chinese renminbi. This is about Saudi Arabia welcoming Syria back into the Arab League. And then you have the United Arab Emirates, which is under attack as well for similar reasons. Here's a New York Times article. I mean, they're just constantly getting hammered by the New York Times, which we never saw before. And it's like these spook investigations where they're relying on all kinds of official sources and satellite data, how a playground for the rich could undermine sanctions on oligarchs. Allies of Vladimir Putin arriving on private jets and yachts are still welcome in the UAE, which has yet to condemn the Ukraine invasion or enforce sanctions. So, one of the core members of the Abraham Accords negotiated by Trump, Mohammed bin Zayed, who is always seen as a core U.S. ally in the region, is maintaining neutrality on Ukraine in order to preserve its own economy and welcoming wealthy Russians, as it welcomes all Russian people, because that's a big source of liquidity in Dubai. And they're being attacked by the New York Times for just not doing whatever the U.S. wants to a suicidal degree. Turkey gets all these same attacks. It's like you have the axis of evil. China's there now, Russia, North Korea, Cuba, whatever. But there's like this junior axis of evil developing, who just a few years ago were seen as core U.S. allies. And it really speaks to what a complete failure and ideologue Tony Blinken and those around him are. This is a historic pivot point in the decline of U.S. empire. And when BRICS takes place, Modi will be there alongside Putin and Ramaphosa of South Africa. What happened to him and his delegation when they visited Ukraine? It was ugly. Their plane of his security team was held for 24 hours on a tarmac in Poland, and they were searched and treated like a group of black men driving through Los Angeles, detained by the LAPD. South Africa openly accused Poland of racism. And then when Ramaphosa was in Kiev, there was another fake air drill, another fake bombing raid alarm, where Ukraine falsely claimed that 6 Russian air raids took place, or missile strikes took place, while he was meeting with Zelensky. South Africa's delegation officially called that misinformation, and he called for negotiations explicitly. Meanwhile, the U.S. is claiming that South Africa sent a ship to Russia filled with weapons, and it is threatening South Africa with the loss of economic cooperation initiatives with the U.S. It's like they're sanctioning 1/3 of the world, and now they're creating an entire new list of enemies that used to be so important to the U.S. to maintain its strategic foothold in everywhere from Africa to the Persian Gulf. And Aaron, your volume's off.
Should we address quickly Blinken's visit to China in a bid to repair
relations? And also we got Lula da Silva. I mean, what are they going to do with Brazil?
Yeah.
Let's move on to Blinken in China.
So here's Blinken meeting with Xi Jinping. This is the visit that he was supposed to make until a balloon flew over the U.S. and then the Biden administration, in its genius, canceled Blinken's trip. So this is the makeup visit. And on this visit, Blinken basically tried to play nice. He even, after months of Biden saying stuff like we would fight a war with China if they invaded Taiwan. Now Blinken's sort of walking that back by saying stuff like this.
On Taiwan, I reiterated the longstanding U.S. One China policy. That policy has not changed. It's guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, the 6 assurances. We do not support Taiwan independence. We remain opposed to any unilateral changes to the status quo by either side. We continue to expect the peaceful resolution of cross-strait differences.
And then, of course, as soon as he got back, Biden kind of ruined everything when he called Xi Jinping a dictator, which I think undermined a lot of what Blinken was supposedly trying to accomplish. But
well, Blinken was trying to get a meeting with Xi, first of all, and trying to set up a summit between Biden and Xi.
yeah.
And Biden makes these comments at a fundraiser in the context of the Chinese balloons. I mean, so stupid.
And what I found most striking is, remember when everybody from Mike Pompeo to Blinken was accusing China of committing genocide? Kind of a big deal, right? Accuse someone of genocide. This is from March 2021. As tensions with China grow, Biden administration formalizes genocide declaration against Beijing, accusing China of genocide in Xinjiang. And all of a sudden, Blinken goes from accusing China of genocide, one of the worst crimes in the world, to completely forgetting about it on this trip. He didn't even mention it. Now, if you're a neocon, you will say, what happened to how dare you not raise the issue of genocide? But the reality is, this was always a fake allegation. It was only used to criminalize diplomacy with China and to demonize China. And that's why Blinken parroted Mike Pompeo, who came up with this genocide thing to begin with. But now that's no longer politically expedient, because that was March 2021. That was early on. That was actually before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now the Biden administration is desperate to split China from Russia, which have grown closer together because of U.S. actions from Taiwan to Ukraine. Now the Biden administration is desperate to basically break up the Chinese-Russian alliance. So the whole genocide thing, the whole crime he accused you of mass extermination, he doesn't even mention that on his trip because it was fake all along.
Yeah. It was also about attacking China's cotton exports, which are heavily, the cotton fields are heavily based in Xinjiang. It was about breaking China's supply chains to the West. And, they may not want to do that at this point. But either way, Ken Roth was freaking out. Regime change Roth was completely freaking out about Blinken's refusal to publicly bring up Tibet and Xinjiang. And it really shows how the U.S. is just not in a very good position right now if they want to have a summit with Xi. And remember that early on, Donald Trump spoke very respectfully of Xi Jinping, referred to him as a friend in his early rallies. And now, obviously Donald Trump turned hostile as Mike Pompeo's agenda took over, but Biden has spoken with such abject disrespect of him. He's called for regime change in Moscow in his Poland speech. And he's
For
just
God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Yeah. This man cannot remain in power. And his administration always has to walk everything back.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if there's going to be a Biden-Xi summit. Biden was asked about this actually in his press conference with Modi. And he said, well, I'm not going, sometimes I have a tendency to state facts, which are true about the Indian leader. The Chinese leader.
Ugh.
So he almost called Modi a dictator. I don't have the clip in front of me, but it's kind of amusing. And it was obviously a gaffe. And then he said, I'm not going to hesitate to do that, but I don't think this will have any effect on the summit. So let's see. Remember that China canceled Blinken's initial visit after the whole balloon drama, which ended with the U.S. dispatching F-16s and F-35s to take down hobby balloons.
So embarrassing. So embarrassing. All right. Well, we have another big topic to get to, and that was this whole controversy that came up recently over this doctor. What's his name? Peter Hotez?
Yeah, Peter Hotez.
Refusing or declining to debate RFK Jr.
Yeah, I thought this was an important thing to cover for us, because what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has done by entering the race is kind of put the expert class on the defensive, whether it's the experts who claim to personally embody the science, or it's the so-called experts on foreign policy and international security and national security. And Peter Hotez is someone who kind of played second fiddle to Anthony Fauci. He was Fauci's hype man throughout the COVID event, working CNN and MSNBC and hyping up every initiative that was required of him in order, either to attack Trump on lockdowns and demand harder lockdowns, support the UK's lockdown, which was based on phony data, or to create momentum for vaccine mandates by demanding that everyone, including 2-year-olds, needed to have 2 doses, and essentially lying to the public and discrediting himself again and again and again without any scrutiny. He was a seminal figure. And when you see him on any MSNBC interview, he's wearing his lab coat. Like he just got out of the lab doing experiments. He's like, I just wafted the beaker and I have enough time to give you, Ari Melber and Mehdi Hassan, to tell you about the science. It's like Zelensky wearing his G.I. Joe outfit, a guy who has no military experience. And their authority is conveyed to the public through their costume in order to get us in line with the official agenda. So Peter Hotez was an extremely influential figure, but he's also someone who's taken it upon himself to attack and discredit what he calls vaccine skeptics or anti-vaxxers and people who are spreading anti-science, in his word. And so he set his sights on RFK Jr., attacking him again and again and again on Twitter. So I think Elon Musk ponied up $100,000 and said, I'll give $100,000 to the charity of your choice if you go on Joe Rogan and debate RFK Jr. And now the whole expert class and all the pundits and the Mehdi Hassans are declaring that he should absolutely not do that and not debate. Peter Hotez, sorry to interrupt. Peter Hotez is a professional public speaker, and he's afraid of debating someone with a literal speech impediment who has problem speaking, who is running for president, who represents the views of everyone that Peter Hotez claims to hate, and he's refusing to get in the lion's den.
And Mehdi Hassan is the author of the book about how to win every argument. So, and he's always bragging about how he loves to debate and blah blah blah. So he's advocating that there not be a debate in this one particular case. That's just really funny. But
yeah. I mean, he had Peter Hotez on his show to allow him to explain why debating was such a terrible idea in this case. Let's just review some of the lies that Peter Hotez told throughout the COVID event. This is a video by our friend Matt Orfalia. And I don't know if we're going to have time to play the whole thing, but you'll get the point.
We're not hearing a lot about is the unique potential safety problem of coronavirus vaccines.
And then something changed.
Any vaccine released by emergency use authorization by the FDA is an outstanding vaccine.
J&J's vaccine has the risk of life-threatening blood clots.
When you hear the beep, that's the sound of safety.
So don't overthink it. They're both really good. They're all really good vaccines. Get vaccinated now.
You gotta call now.
If you wait, it's going to be really too late to protect your child.
If this was your child, what happens next could make it the worst day of your life.
So even though COVID poses zero threat to healthy children,
Vaccinate your children.
Do the right thing. Be safe and not sorry.
I'm strongly recommending for adolescents to get their 2 doses of vaccine and fully immunized after those 2 doses.
Advanced technology that can help save lives.
This is going to be a long-lasting vaccine.
A few moments later,
We're seeing that 2 doses is not holding up well for emergency room visits. It's not holding up well for hospitalizations.
Here we go again.
everyone's going to need a booster. You need that third immunization.
Triple the amount.
Get that third immunization. The 2 mRNA vaccines were always a 3-dose vaccine. The 2 mRNA vaccines were always a 3-dose vaccine. I've always said this is a 3-dose vaccine. I've always said this is a 3-dose vaccine. This is a 3-dose vaccine.
But I'm not done yet.
That third immunization, the problem is it's not holding up. So we may have to look at sort of innovative solutions.
Oh God, not this again.
A fourth immunization, just to keep them going, keep the country going. We have to consider some out of the box things. A fourth immunization, a fourth immunization. Get that second boost, a second boost to keep the country going. I've made that recommendation. A fourth immunization.
All right. Well, I could just keep going on. I mean, if we were to follow his schedule, it would be like the 6th now, but the bivalent booster, I mean, no one's even promoting that anymore. And I think less than 15% of the American public is even taking boosters. It's gotten to the point where like Michael Phelps is doing ads for Pfizer where he said that he has to take a booster because he suffers from depression, and Questlove suffers from weight loss or weight gain, and that puts them at special risk from COVID. But the point is, Peter Hotez has never been held accountable. He also was pushing lockdowns, which have done enormous damage, especially to poor and vulnerable populations, caused learning loss for an entire generation, especially public school students, opioid addiction off the charts, homelessness, evictions. And, there's a whole swath of the public. And I know a lot of the liberal left laptop class isn't very familiar with this part of the public known as the working class that they fetishize, but they are extremely, extremely angry at Fauci and Hotez, and they want this moment for someone to hold them accountable since they're not going to be criminally prosecuted for what they did. 3 hours in Joe Rogan's garage in Austin, Texas would be cathartic, I think, for that part of the public. Or Hotez could actually hold his own, but he won't do it. So it's really exposed to that swath of the public what these so-called experts really about. You know, what I've noticed in a lot of the critiques of Hotez is that people are pulling from so many different sources. There's just so many videos of him lying. Or I just looked up Peter Hotez lockdown on Twitter, and I found him saying Boris Johnson is doing a great job with the lockdown. By the way, Boris Johnson has just faced a parliamentary condemnation for his own role in breaking lockdown. And then a week or like 3 weeks later, Peter Hotez declares that real scientists don't use the term lockdown. It's a phony term, except he just used it to call for one. It's just like, you can just, and this is just like all the foreign policy experts we deal with. They're all complete frauds. They derive their sense of credibility from their phony costumes, whether it's, a well-tailored suit at the Brookings Institution or the lab coat, and from the plaudits and acceptance that they receive from fellow affluent liberals who claim to hold credentials. It's not credibility from the public or that their predictions ever came true. So I think Hotez is an easy target here.
Let me give an example of the kind of hypocrisy and just partisan hackery that I totally get why people are livid at this guy. So here he is, Hotez. He's talking about Alex Jones. Alex Jones will attend anti-COVID vaccine protests here in Houston. Can you imagine people going so far down this anti-vax rabbit hole, jeopardizing their lives or the lives of their kids? Lives for what? And so this is the classic line we got, that whenever, like in Florida, where people were gathering outside or going to, any kind of like in any kind of conservative or Republican gathering or area, this was like they were endangering everybody. But then when you had the Black Lives Matter protests, which people like Peter Hotez, who are Democratic Party partisans, they don't care about Black Lives Matter. They cared about these protests because they could instrumentalize them for Biden's reelection. That's why Democratic hacks were cheering them on. So here he says this. I explained why it's not so simple to just say protests will bring back COVID-19. Rather, structural racism causes 3 times higher COVID-19 death rates in the African-American population, and rates already increasing in many states. So when it's Republicans, conservatives gathering during COVID, they're killing themselves. These are like mass killing gatherings. When it's protests that can be exploited to help reelect Joe Biden, all of a sudden, it's actually in the interest of public health for these protests to gather. And how can you look at that and take these people seriously. It's such an abuse of science. It's such a blatant abuse of science. So
they're discrediting the scientific, to the extent there is a scientific establishment. These characters during the COVID event have solidly discredited it. They're discrediting the vaccination schedule with their support for vaccines that young children and adolescents did not need, the mRNA emergency use vaccines for COVID. They're discrediting, the normal vaccine schedule. And that's what this debate is going to be about. Ultimately, it's going to come down to the vaccine schedule itself. And that's an own goal on Hotez's part, who's tried to avoid people like RFK throughout his whole life while attacking them.
This is when I first heard of Hotez, because here he is Russiagating.
Yeah.
I don't claim to have the answers, but ultimately it was the anti-science disinformation campaign from the Russian government, together with with whatever it is, and national, that massively expanded the deaths from COVID-19 in America. So here he is blaming the Russian government, the Kremlin, for vaccine skepticism in the US, which he then in turn says led to more deaths from COVID-19. That's just Russiagating to the max. And when I saw that, I knew I could never take this guy seriously ever again. If he's that much of a hack to do something like that.
Well, I just found this, Aaron, from the Bullet of Atomic Scientists. This is an interview with Peter Hotez. I think Russia is probably the most egregious perpetrator of spreading anti-vaccine rhetoric, using
they
it
had
as
a vaccine
issue
they
to divide the country.
Vaccine. They had their own vaccine.
Yeah, well, they had the Sputnik vaccine, and the Russian Sovereign Investment Fund sponsored it. So basically, the Russian government had a financial stake in making sure that as many people in the country in the Russian Federation got vaccinated with it, and that they were able to export it abroad. And they were freaking out about their own population not wanting that vaccine, which also, just like ours, didn't prevent transmission or infection. But the Russian government, the Kremlin itself, had a very strong stake in getting everyone to take their vaccines. So he's saying
the U.S. even pressured Ukraine not to accept the Russian vaccine. One of Putin's allies in Ukraine brokered a deal where Russia was going to supply all these free vaccines to Ukraine, and the State Department pressured Zelensky not to accept it. So, I mean, if your metric is vaccine skepticism, it was in fact the U.S. that was pushing vaccine skepticism in places like Ukraine, because again, they're so opposed to, not that they had any safety concerns about the Russian vaccine. That's hard to take seriously. Yeah. They didn't want to do anything that could foster ties between Russia and Ukraine. And Zelensky caved to that.
Well, here's Peter Hotez actually discussing how he lobbied the Biden administration to bring in Homeland Security, the Commerce Department, the Justice Department, and the State Department to investigate vaccine skepticism as a secret Russian plot. Wow. I mean, this is just bonkers, absolutely bonkers. And he's complaining that even the Biden administration hasn't done this. I mean, what did he actually bring to the table other than disinformation, hysteria, calls for increasing the security state to investigate Americans who have no connection to Russia as possible Russian assets? Nothing. And so it's no wonder that he wants to hide and pretend this whole thing didn't happen. And the reason that he's being defended by the expert class is the same reason that Christopher Steele was defended with a fawning profile in the New Yorker by Jane Mayer, why Adam Schiff is being defended, why John Durham is being attacked. It's the same reason that they discredited themselves on the same basis, and they can't accept public scrutiny. Everyone who attacks them, by the way, is a fascist, an authoritarian who supports autocracy. They can just dismiss it all. And that's why, I thought it was so important for me to at least get in Rachel Maddow's face and try to ask her about some of this, because she never, ever will subject herself to debate or public scrutiny. I mean, Aaron, you tried to debate so many people who've attacked you on Twitter. And you did actually, back in the day, you managed to get Ned Price, who was the State Department spokesman, to debate you on Russiagate. I mean, we're open for debate. We didn't. I don't think anyone paid him.
No, certainly not. No. And I'm sure he does not want that video to exist on the internet. Not because we're debating, because I just don't think they want to acknowledge that we even exist, because they can't tolerate a countervailing point of view, a dissenting narrative, but they've been successful. If you look at the level of debate we saw about the Ukraine proxy war even in progressive media, you weren't allowed to say the things we were saying. You've experienced that with every issue you've covered, from Syria to COVID. There's just no tolerance.
Well, even Palestine.
I mean, yeah, right. When your own colleagues at The Nation and tried to have you canceled.
Here's a tweet that really sums it all up from Ian Bremmer. The main reason an expert shouldn't debate RFK Jr. on vaccines is that he has no expertise on the issue. It would be like me debating Elon on electric vehicles, or him debating me on international relations. There's no value added.
Oh, that's hilarious. I love it when people claim to have some sort of like scientific expertise when it comes to politics, as if politics is governed by rules. As if it's like the term political science, even to me, is so funny, as if it's like politics is science that only this like enlightened group of experts like Ian Bremmer can master. That is so funny. Wow.
Oh yeah. I mean, and Ian Bremmer clearly hasn't mastered it. I mean, you just look at, search Ian Bremmer Syria, and you'll just find the laziest tweets that play on the prejudices of his buddies in Davos. They don't provide any insight into what's really happening in Syria. He'll just tweet, those stupid English language signs in Kafra Nabal that'll be like, Mr. Biden, you have not bombed Syria, and we really regret this. Ian Bremmer will tweet those out like they're just like, this is what Syrians think, and we're not doing it. Like, he doesn't realize Raed Farias was the guy who was writing those signs, and he was sponsored entirely by USAID. Kafra Nabal was in Idlib, which has been captured by Al-Qaeda thanks to US weapons, and that Raed Farias was actually eventually killed by Al-Qaeda and company because he wasn't extreme enough, but he was just a US asset. That's all he was. You're not going to get that from Ian Bremmer. He was a total Russiagate fanatic. I mean, I think anyone watching this right now, anyone in the chat, could run circles around Ian Bremmer.
Of course.
Because you're willing to look at the world as it is, and he depends entirely. He runs a risk management company, so it means he depends on his clients paying him, and he depends on the approval of his buddies. I mean, he's kind of like the Peter Hotez of international relations. I mean, this is him. This is just like a tweet he made unironically. Here's, a portrait of an expert. Closing out Davos, drinks with Chancellor Scholz. Just a few months after Nord Stream was bombed. This is like the expert. This is the source of his expertise, is that he has drinks with Olaf Scholz, the German Kuckmeister.
Here's another expert. Just going back to Ukraine for 1 second. Andrea Kendall Taylor, prominent think tanker. I think she served in the government under Obama, I believe. She has a new article out in Foreign Affairs talking about how she's still talking about not only Ukrainian victory, but also how Ukrainian victory could lead to regime change in Moscow. That's the argument of her piece, is how Ukrainian victory could lead to regime change in Moscow. The same fantasy that neocons have been pushing for the past decade. And meanwhile, on the ground, we talked about it in the earlier segment about how actually horribly things are going for Ukraine. But these people are so delusional. They are they're infected by a disease like this Russophobic disease, where all they can think about, they're obsessed with regime changing Putin, because Putin represents defiance to the US-led order, and it colors everything they write. And so this is a former US official in the top US foreign policy journal, actually talking about not only the prospect of Ukrainian success, which is not happening on the ground, but also how fantasizing that could actually lead to Putin's overthrow, when actually Putin right now is in a pretty strong position. It's just, the delusion is incredible, but that's what it takes to be a so-called international expert in Washington.
Yeah, actually, I suffered through Ann Applebaum and Jeffrey Goldberg's counteroffensive propaganda article. And Ann Applebaum says that the counteroffensive is important because it will lead to regime change, not just in Moscow, but in Belarus and Venezuela. She actually said that we need to do this to support Democrats in Venezuela. It explicitly says that. And she says that when Putin's replaced, it doesn't matter if he will be replaced with an ultra-nationalist lunatic, because the ultra-nationalist lunatic will be weaker, and all we want to do is weaken Russia. Wow. So she's, accepted as an expert. And what this all comes down to is that these people are the biggest proliferators of disinformation and conspiracy theories, and that their conspiracy theories and disinformation has more real world consequences than anything that we or RFK Jr. could say. I'm not saying we're spreading conspiracy theories. We spread conspiracy facts, and we do conspiracy analysis. But we're not in power. We're not in a position of authority. Peter Hotez was effectively in a position of authority to actually affect real world harm. And so these people need to be held accountable in public forums, if not prosecuted. You've had people prosecuted for incitement to war with lies, whatever. Let's debate. So if Ian Bremmer were to respond to me calling him the Peter Hotez of international relations, I would invite him to debate right here. And he would say no.
Will never happen. Will never happen. We saw it during Russiagate. During Russiagate, you couldn't even debate the question of whether or not Trump was a Russian asset. That was just taken to be gospel. That's truth. If you question it, you are beyond the pale. You're spreading Russian disinformation, and you can't even be acknowledged. And that's just how it operated. And if you can't even debate something that dumb, that Trump is engaged in a sprawling conspiracy with Russia and has been blackmailed with a P tape ever since he was the host of The Apprentice, like, how are you gonna debate anything else?
You can't. But we're gonna do what we can to at least bring facts to the spreaders of disinformation. Aaron, I know that our time is almost up, but I don't know if you want to do a quick wrap up of Durham or Hunter Biden or anything, or the Schiff censor, maybe in 5 minutes.
I wonder if we should save it for next time, because I think we'll need more time on it. Up to you though. But if we can try to do something quick, if you want.
Just give us a quick wrap up of.
All right. Well, so John Durham, who's been engaged in this never-ending investigation of the Russia investigation, he recently submitted his final report, which we've discussed, and the final report didn't come up with anything new. We already knew that the Trump-Russia investigation was baseless, but at least we had a U.S. government body, Durham's office, confirming that. He said that the investigation was baseless, shouldn't have been launched, and it was continued with fraud. The U.S., the FBI ignored all this countervailing evidence. They ignored intelligence which they received at the very start of the entire Trump-Russia investigation, that Hillary Clinton was plotting to frame Trump as a Russian asset. So it confirmed all that. But he didn't go to all the places where he should have gone. He didn't actually touch the allegation, the foundational allegation that Russia hacked the DNC, even though, as I've written about recently, he actually uncovered new evidence showing that that was a scam, a Clinton campaign scam. So anyway, he appeared before Congress, and it was a kind of an underwhelming appearance. Democrats, members of Blue and On, attacked him for daring to challenge their conspiracy theory, and they clung to anything they could to make the conspiracy theory look credible. But here's an exchange where basically Durham discusses, I think, one of the most important parts of his investigation, which is that the FBI knew that Clinton was plotting to frame Trump as a Russian asset. But instead of investigating the Clinton campaign, they used her material, like the Steele dossier, for leads and even surveillance warrants.
2016, did our government receive intelligence that suggested Secretary Clinton had approved a plan to tie President Trump to Russia?
Yes.
Was that intelligence important enough for Director Brennan to go brief the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the Attorney General of the United States, and the Director of the FBI?
Yes.
And was that intelligence put then into a memorandum, a referral memorandum?
Yes.
And was that memorandum then given to Director Comey and Agent Strzok?
That's who it was addressed to, yes.
Did Director Comey share that memorandum with the FISA court?
I'm sorry,
Did he share that memorandum with the FISA court? Did Director Comey do that?
I'm not aware of that if he did.
Did he share it with the lawyers preparing the FISA application?
Not to my knowledge.
Did he share it with the agents on the case, working the Crossfire Hurricane case?
No.
Didn't share it with the agents on the case. Can you tell the committee what happened when you took that referral memo and shared it with one of those agents, specifically Supervisory Special Agent number 1?
We interviewed the first supervisor of the Crossfire investigation, the operational person. We showed him the intelligence information. He indicated he had never seen it before. He immediately became emotional, got up and left the room with his lawyer, spent some time in the hallway, came back.
He was ticked off, wasn't he?
Yes.
He was ticked off because this is something he should have had as an agent on the case, is important information that the director of the FBI kept from the people doing the investigation.
The information was kept from him.
So for people who find that hard to follow, Durham's being asked about this core finding that the FBI knew from the start. They received warnings at the highest level from the CIA that they had intelligence that Clinton was plotting to frame Trump as a Russian asset. And this intelligence was so important that it was briefed to Obama and Biden in late July 2016, right when the Russia investigation kicked off. And what Durham is saying here is that instead of doing anything with that, the FBI buried it. So Comey got a specific warning about this and he buried it. They didn't tell anybody on the Crossfire Hurricane team. They buried it. And then when a member of the Crossfire Hurricane team found out about this from Durham, he became very upset. That's what Durham's talking about there. And amazingly, Comey, he's been asked about this once before Congress. And he was asked, like, do you recall being warned that by a referral memo that the Clinton campaign was plotting to frame Trump? This is again in 2016 when all this was getting off the ground. And Comey said, it doesn't ring any bells. So Comey claimed not to even remember that the conspiracy theory he was investigating of Trump as a Russian asset was really being concocted by his opponent, by Clinton. And Comey says it doesn't ring any bells. So that just underscores that Comey was a part of an operation to set up Trump and is now covering it up. And Durham, rather than interviewing Comey, he didn't, because Comey said no, and Durham didn't issue a subpoena of him. And that's an illustration of the fact that even though Durham uncovered some important or underscored some important revelations, he didn't exert his authority to get to the truth, to the point where Jim Comey, Peter Strzok, Andrew McCabe, all senior officials in the Trump-Russia probe, all of them declined to speak to them. He didn't subpoena them. So Durham caved ultimately, even though he's saying some important things. And just to underscore this, on the core allegation of Russian interference, Durham also didn't touch that. He left it unscathed. And he was asked during this hearing, like, did you look into the allegations that Russia hacked the DNC? He said, that was outside of my scope, which is not true, because William Barr, who appointed Durham, says in his book that actually the hacking of the DNC was within Durham's scope. So Durham chose not to go there. And the reason he chose not to go there, I think, for the same reason he chose not to question these intelligence officials like Comey, is because he didn't want to really actually take on the national security state. He was willing to go to acknowledge what was already public, which is that this was a scam and that this was baseless and that this was a Clinton campaign operation. But he wouldn't challenge the Russian hacking allegation because this allegation has been so central, not just to, this partisan fight over Trump and framing as a Russian asset, but also, more importantly, criminalizing diplomacy with Russia, because the allegation that Russia took these emails, that was used to accuse Russia of invading our democracy, of committing a cyber 9/11. And that contributed to this climate, as Max and I were warning about tirelessly when it was happening, of criminalizing diplomacy with Russia, demonizing Russia, and setting the stage for things like the Ukraine proxy war, the escalation of the Ukraine proxy war. So here, for example, is Durham being questioned by Adam Schiff. And just listen to how meek Durham's answers are when Schiff is grilling him here. I mean, it's kind of obvious that Durham doesn't buy into the Russiagate narrative when it comes to Russian interference, but you don't see him really forcefully challenge it.
Remember what this is all about. Let me ask you, The Mueller investigation revealed that Russia interfered in the 2016 election in sweeping and systemic fashion, correct?
That's correct.
And Russia did so.
So notice how Durham accepts the premise of the Russiagate.
Well, yeah, it's completely distorted. But
yeah, I mean, the Mueller investigation didn't reveal anything. It claimed that Russia interfered in this sweeping and systemic way. But then you look at the evidence, as we have, and the evidence undermines that allegation. But Durham just didn't go there. So here's more.
Go through a social media campaign that favored Donald Trump and disparaged Hillary Clinton, correct?
The report says, yes.
So that's actually a tell that Durham can't buy into that one, because now Schiff is trying to say that Russia waged this sweeping interference campaign on social media, which if you again look at the facts, it's a joke. There's a bunch of dumb memes that nobody saw that were barely about the election. And so Durham there says that's what the report says. He's actually not endorsing the allegation. But if he was honest, he would say, well, the report says that, but the evidence doesn't support that at all, because this was just a dumb meme operation that nobody saw. But again, he didn't have the courage to go there.
And Mueller found that a Russian intelligence service hacked computers associated with the Clinton campaign and then released the stolen documents publicly. Is that right?
That report speaks for itself as well.
Again, not a direct answer. The report speaks for itself.
Yeah.
So he's actually not endorsing it, but he's not challenging it either. And that's basically Durham. Unfortunately, I had been told so often throughout the course of his investigation by people who I think had reliable knowledge that he had gotten some really important stuff. And I don't doubt that he did, but he didn't do anything with it. He fell on his sword, and he squabbled, I think, a really big opportunity to hold people to account.
Definitely. Well, just the lack of subpoenas means that nothing consequential can come out of this. Essentially, the FBI issues some empty pledge for reform, and what are we getting out of this other than just kind of kicking the can down the road so the FBI can continue to abuse its power and authority? And
yeah,
it's really Jim Comey who needed to testify under oath.
And by the way, just one more thing. Another big factor, I think, why he didn't want to go there is if you go to the core allegation of Russian hacking and you look into the evidence, all the evidence undermines it. The CrowdStrike admitting that they had no evidence of Russian hacking. CrowdStrike, of course, being a Clinton campaign contractor who was hired to accuse Russia, just as Clinton was hiring Christopher Steele to frame Trump as a Russian asset. Anyway, also, if you really look into the evidence, then you're going to actually exonerate WikiLeaks, because WikiLeaks was accused of being a Russian puppet. And if you actually look at the allegations and the evidence undermines that claim, then you're also then challenging the establishment narrative that's been used to demonize Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, which is that WikiLeaks is just another Russian front, basically, and doing Russia's bidding. And Julian Assange has always said that his source for the emails was not any state party, including Russia. And he even offered to provide technical evidence that he said could rule out state parties like Russia as the source of the emails. But the FBI under Mueller had no interest in that whatsoever. They wouldn't even speak to Assange either. And so if Durham were to go there, he'd also be undermining the predominant narrative used to demonize WikiLeaks. And again, he just didn't have the courage to do that.
My favorite part was when the Internet Research Agency, which was supposedly responsible for this fake news attack and $160,000 of Facebook ads, actually decided to challenge the indictment through a holding company in court, and the U.S. didn't show up.
Mueller withdrew the case.
Mueller withdrew the case once they actually challenged the indictment. It's like
once they asked for discovery, Mueller withdrew the case and said that this case wouldn't, if we gave up this information, it would endanger national security. And that was an acknowledgement that case was such a joke. And of course, and again, during this hearing, Democrats, one of their lines of argument was like, Mr. Durham, didn't Mueller indict, dozens of people and bring all these cases? And like, that was their argument, that because of the volume of Mueller's indictments, that somehow made the Mueller investigation credible. As if all of a sudden, if you indict someone, that means that the underlying charge in the case is legitimate, which is odd for progressive Democrats, especially to make, because they're supposed to be critical of the criminal justice system. Anyway, but again, Durham could have mentioned, well, actually, this one major case he brought, Mueller withdrew it as soon as the Internet Research Agency challenged it. He didn't do that. He was really meek, and it's a wasted opportunity, but that's to be expected. It just underscores that we don't live under just a government elected by the people. The real institution is the permanent state, the national security state. And they certainly won this round. Even if they were embarrassed, the fact that no one was held accountable speaks to their power.
Well said. And we'll cover Hunter Biden getting off easy. Definitely not a sweetheart deal by the Justice Department of his father next week.
Yeah.
Right now, we're kind of out of time. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thanks for liking this stream. It's really important that you like it so we can cheat the suppressive algorithm. Thanks for subscribing, donating, whatever you can do. We're providing investigative journalism as a free service. We don't have subscriptions, paywalls, ads, so we're dependent on you. And thanks, Aaron, for joining me for another really productive discussion.
Thank you, Max. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And as Max said, please like the stream and share it. And we'll see you next time.
And some real quality journalism coming up in the next few days. So visit thegrayzone.com or follow us on social media. Telegram, Twitter, whatever. Everywhere but Facebook, because they destroyed us. Like you can, they suppressed us so hard, there's no point. All right. Peace, everybody.
Peace.